In this video, we're going to show you how to replace the driver's side rear CV axle on your Nissan Rogue located in the driver's side rear suspension area. Let's go ahead and remove that center cap. Just put your fingers behind the cap here and gently tug outward. Using a 21mm socket, let's get it loosened and remove the lug nuts. Now that you have the lug nuts removed, go ahead and grab that wheel, pull it off, and set it aside. Using a pair of pliers, go ahead and remove the cotter pin. Cotter pins are a one-time use, so you want to make sure you can source another one of these. Using a 30mm socket, we want to go ahead and loosen our axle nut. I'm not going to remove it. I just want to make sure that we have enough of threads in there, but this will act as a retainer for our whole assembly to the CV axle. Using an 18mm socket, go ahead and loosen the nut on the shock. Before we pop this off, I'm going to put my jack underneath the knuckle here, raise it up slightly, slide that bolt out. You can go ahead and release your jack for now. We're going to use a 21mm socket on the bolt side and 21mm on the nut side on our lower control arm. Let's go ahead and loosen this. Now we do not want to remove this yet. Currently, our suspension is under tension from the coil spring. We want to go ahead and put our jack underneath here. We want to go ahead and support the knuckle before we remove this here. Raise up our control arm here. At this point here, lower your jack gently. We're going to try and take the tension load off of that coil spring. Using an 18mm socket, let's go ahead and loosen and remove the nut and bolt holding the sway bar end link to the lower control arm here. And put your open-ended wrench behind the bolt head. Go ahead and work that out. Let's go ahead and slowly lower our jack, taking the tension off the coil spring. Using an 18mm socket, swivel and extension, I want to go ahead and loosen the upper sway bar end link bolt. Use an 18mm wrench on the bolt side. The reason why we're removing this here is that as the suspension drops, the end link hits the axle. We have our upper bolt here to the upper link arm using a 21 millimeter socket on the bolt side and 21 millimeter wrench on the nut side. Go ahead and loosen that bolt. I'm going to leave the bolt in there, remove that nut. Go ahead and pull that bolt out. Now at this point here, we should be able to go ahead and push down gently on the knuckle. Our coil spring is much looser, so we're going to push this down a little bit more. I'm going to use a crayon. I'm going to mark the position of the coil spring and the rubber bushing. Where the tail end of the spring is and the bushing, I'm just going to put a yellow line on there so I know when I install this, it'll match up with that again. Go ahead and use your pry bar. Go ahead and work that out. I'm going to remove this 10 millimeter bolt holding our ABS wire bracket right here. At this point here, we're going to use this jack to go ahead and raise up our control arm. There is no shock or spring attached, so it's very easily moved. Now at this point here, we have our jack underneath the rear trailing arm here. I'm going to go ahead and remove our axle nut. Now the upper trailing arm here is unbolted. We want to go ahead and lower down our jack just a little bit and pull our knuckle out. Now at this point, with our knuckle separated, it is supported on our jack. Go ahead and get this underneath a little bit better. Go ahead and start pushing the axle from the front inward, and we can work that out. Now in the rear center of the vehicle, you have your differential. You can see where the axle comes up and goes in. There's a little lip or flange on here. I'm going to put my pry bar on the lip of the axle and the housing of the differential and gently pry outward. And what that does is it dislodges the little retaining clip inside. You might want to have a towel or some drip rags or bucket underneath in case a little bit of differential fluid comes out when we remove this axle. Go ahead and work our axle up and in. Now with the axle in, I'm going to use my mallet here. Tap that until that axle is seated inside the differential. When I refer to being seated, you want to make sure that the flange here is up against the differential and there's no space between that. I'm going to go ahead and put some grease on the CV axle splines here. At this point here, I'm going to go ahead and work this in. Be careful not to damage the ABS speed sensor. Line up the spline shaft with the axle into the back of the wheel hub. Go ahead and thread on the axle nut. Make sure that the upper pigtails line up in the bushing as well as the bottom. You can use a screwdriver to go through the knuckle into the link end. And we'll put our jack underneath the control arm. I'm going to raise this up. And once you're able to tap that bolt through, go ahead and install the nut. Just get started a few threads. Go ahead and release our jack. Let's go ahead and install our upper link. I'm going to put my pole jack up underneath the control arm itself. I'm going to go ahead and raise this up. That'll help us with alignment of both the bottom link as well as our end link here. And install a lower bolt. Now we're having a hard time getting our bolt lining up on the other side. The lower control arm or link has a hole in it. You can simply use this to go ahead and manipulate that link for things to line up. Now at this point here, we actually used our pole jack to raise and lower the suspension to get the bolt to line up nicely. We go ahead and get the nut installed on the side here. Now we can go ahead, lower our jack down. Just work with our jack a little bit here to now get our sway bar end link to line up. Get that bolt in, get the nut installed. I'm going to go ahead and raise this up. Makes it a little bit easier to line up our shock. And at this point here, we're going to use our jack to go ahead and compress our rear suspension completely, just to the point where it starts coming off of your jack stands or your lift. We want the vehicle to be at its natural ride height where the suspension is compressed up and in, and then we'll go ahead and tighten down the bolt. Torque down the outer bolt to 111 foot-pounds. Torque down the end link bolts to 81 foot-pounds. Torque down the shock bolt to 89 foot-pounds. Once you've torqued down your bolts, you can remove your jack. Install the ABS wire bracket. And snug down the bolt. Using a 32mm socket, go ahead and snug down the axle nut. And install 2 lug nuts. Zip them down as far as you can go. Going to use the pry bar as a stopper here. Torque down the axle nut to 92 foot-pounds. Remove the lug nuts. Install a new cotter pin. And snip off the other tab. Go ahead and grab that wheel. Line that up. Slide that into place. Let's go ahead and get all of our lug nuts started by hand. Once these are all on, we'll go ahead and snug them down. Let's go ahead and torque down our lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. Once you have these torqued down, I'm going to go ahead and install your wheel cap. I want to pay attention to the notch right here. That is where your valve stem is going to go. You're all set. After finishing this installation, it's important to have an alignment done on your vehicle.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.